All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion. We're absolutely thrilled to have a global audience for this event. My name is Morgan Short, and I'm speaking to you today from the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And I'm the chair for the ICRS Student and Early Career Chapter. So we are one of 5 chapters belonging to the International Coral Reef Society. And this society promotes the acquisition and dissemination of scientific knowledge to secure coral reefs for future generations. Our chapter is specifically focused on providing support and resources for students and recent graduates who are in transitional roles within coral reef science. In our chapter, we have several committees who organize and create resources, develop workshops, and disseminate coral research to increase visibility of early career researchers. This panel today was organized by a joint effort between our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee and our Skill and Professional Development Committee. So many thanks to each of you for the numerous months of planning and effort that went into putting this together. I also want to thank our social media, website, and translation committees, along with Anderson Mayfield and Mark Eakin for helping to publicize and manage the logistics of this event. And finally, I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists for your vulnerability in sharing your experiences and insights with our global community. I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives and learning from you. And with that, I will now pass it on to our moderators.
Thank you, Morgan. I'm one of the moderators. My name is Daniel Olivares Cordero. I'm just very happy to be having this panel. And as somebody who has worked on like workshops related to education of decolonization of ecology and evolution, just in general, one of the biggest motivations was to highlight the role like parachute science has for those of you that don't know what parachute science is, it's just like going to nations or countries outside of your own and like just exploiting like resources in this case like research resources without like helping or developing like any of the folks that are actually there. So with that being said, and I'll turn it over to Emily.
Hey everyone. First of all, it's really great to see how many people have joined us today. This is a great turnout. Welcome to our workshop on perspectives of Indigenous and local coral reef scientists. My name is Emily. I am your other moderator for today. I'm a PhD student based in Hong Kong, and I'm part of the SECC Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. I've been facilitating dialogue on diversity for most of my academic career, so I'm really excited to be part of this conversation today. And I feel strongly that as a coral reef researcher, this is a topic that we should be discussing a lot more and that needs a lot more conversation in our field. So hopefully you've all joined us because you feel the same way about it or are interested in learning more. So for our workshop today, we have 4 panelists, wonderful panelists, who will be talking to us about their experiences as local and Indigenous coral reef scientists. And before we jump into our discussion today, I'd like to invite the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And we can start with Kaiku.
Aloha no o Kaiku Kaholoaa. He ake mai wau me ke hele nei wau ma ke kula nui o Stanford University. Aloha everyone, my name is Kaiku Kaholoaa. I am a native Hawaiian from Molokai, Hawaii, and I am currently obtaining my PhD at Stanford University at Hopkins Marine Station. My research interests and focuses are on coral genetics and genomics and physiology, trying to figure out what genes are helping corals survive climate change. And my experience is conducting lots of heat stress experiments across the Pacific, working with local communities and in supporting their own conservation goals. And I enjoy teaching classes on how to engage in ethical research with Indigenous populations. Yeah. And next, I'd like to pass it on to Ami.
Glennis and Hoffaday. I'm Ahmyia Cacapit, and I'm Chamorro from Junya, Guam, which is an unincorporated territory in the United States. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Guam, focusing on biology, and I participated in different REUs throughout undergrad, and these opportunities have allowed me to pursue my graduate degree at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I work in the Sandin Lab, and I focus on coral recruitment and spatial ecology using large area imagery. I've also been active in other DEI efforts, such as Scripps' Women and Minorities in Science, and I also work with NCAR to do DEI work with their summer interns. So that's a bit about me, and I'm really excited for this panel today. And for that, I'll pass it on to Anela.
Aloha mai kako, everyone. My name is Anela Akiona. I am a Native Hawaiian PhD candidate. I'm originally from Waimanalo, Oahu. I'm currently at Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. Also in the Sandin Lab, like Ami is, my research is focused on modeling coral intervention. So seeing what happens when we use different types of interventions in different places, what sort of difference that can make for the ecosystem. Before I was at Scripps, I did a master's in marine biology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I've also done work in the Caribbean. I have done some pretty extensive field work in the Pacific, especially over the past few years. I'm also co-director of Women and Minorities in Science at Scripps. And before I did my master's, I did my undergrad at the University of San Diego. And with that, I will pass it to Shamoy.
Hey guys, good evening on my end. But hello again. I'm Shamoy Bideau. I am from St. Croix. I grew up in St. Lucia. I'm currently a graduate student at University of Virgin Islands. I'm located on St. Croix. However, it will say St. Thomas because that's where majority of the marine science goes on. I'm primarily interested in coral reef restoration and management. In the future, I would want to do my PhD looking at zooplankton ecology. And as of current, my experiences range from outreach coordination. So I'm the coordinator of a youth ocean explorers here on St. Croix. St. Croix and St. Thomas do have a mirrored program. So we both work together to engage the youth of both islands and even St. John, which is the third Virgin Islands, in youth education and outreach surrounding ridge to reef areas. My graduate studies identified size requirements of rice varieties for restoration purposes at the Nature Conservancy. Also, Dr. Marilyn Brandt on St. Thomas is my advisor. So thanks, Dr. Brandt, for sending me back home to St. Croix. And that's just a little bit about me. I'm hopeful that I can give you guys more context of what St. Croix is like and how it has enabled me to become the scientist I am today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists for all your wonderful introductions. And with that, I'll take us over to one of the first of our 5 questions for today. And yeah, and these questions will cover just topics related to like bridging traditional coral reef knowledge and I guess the way we do like modern science, right? And in addition, like it'll cover topics about like identity and just like topics related to that. So I'll just get started. So I wanted to start with the question, as both researchers and local and native people of coral reef regions, what do you think we need to bridge traditional and modern coral science?
I can start. Well, to begin, traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous knowledge is information that has been tried and tested through many years of an intimate relationship between a specific people and their specific environments. So what this means is that indigenous knowledge is a much more refined piece of information that we as scientists can use to support conservation goals And so we should definitely include this information and the communities that foster them in our research efforts. But it's also important to note that we should only include it if this is something that the community is interested in sharing with us. Because yes, text and our TEKs, traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge, is greatly appreciated in our work, but it's not something for us to extract and take from these communities, but instead it's more of a gift that we can receive by actively working with and engaging with these local people. Another reason why it's important for us to incorporate traditional knowledge with modern science is because the people who might actually carry this work through could be the same people who foster this knowledge. And so that means our goal here is to actually uplift these communities so much so that they can be able to lead their own conservation efforts using traditional knowledge supported by Western science, for example. And that's kind of my goal as a core biologist that's coming from a Native background, is to support these communities and communities like mine to the point where they're actually able to become the leaders of their own natural resources.
Yeah, to echo what Kaiku is saying is I think it bridges these connections and it builds a sense of community between researchers who are not active on the ground versus the community who is active on the ground. And that builds reciprocity, it builds mutual understanding, and it fosters greater communication as opposed to just being told from a Western point of view what we should do, as opposed to working with traditional management and taking into context what these systems have been going through and what these people have underseen these changes. I think that really helps bridge into context, like what activities can be done that'll work in a sense of a community-based action plans. I think it gives more buy-in for the community and it makes it more effective, and it makes it seem like there's just greater investment and understanding, not only in coral reefs, but also the communities that rely on coral reefs.
Yeah, I agree with everything Kaiku and Ami said. I think, they've covered all the main points of like why it's important to merge these two types of science, but I kind of wanted to take the question in like a slightly different direction in terms of the way we're like framing like traditional knowledge and like modern science. And I think they inherently both have like connotations that we are like subconsciously bringing in. If you go to like a local community and you're thinking, I feel like if you think of something as like traditional, it's like whimsical and like maybe antiquated and like we're doing like hard science, so I think we kind of need to throw that perception out. If you're coming into a community, like you need to recognize that traditional science is modern science. Like it's always evolving, it's been happening for hundreds, thousands of years, and it's like continuously evolving. And like the people, like local people, indigenous peoples, there are scientists, like they didn't come to the conclusions about their natural environment just by chance, like they were doing essentially the scientific process of observing and like experimenting and making conclusions based on the things that they saw and found. So I just wanted to make that note about like trying to change your perceptions when you are going into communities and thinking about how you can incorporate local knowledge into whatever work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, I kind of want to piggyback off of that because so majority of our quote unquote traditional science when it comes to the near coastal waters or even our reefs around the Virgin Islands comes from fishermen here. So they pretty much have majority of the knowledge that I learned from them and anyone else who is needing some kind of information pertaining to areas to go, how certain areas act around certain times of years. they have navigated these waters umpteen times over, and they can tell us, not by, outright shoving it down our throats, but, they can give us hints, or anyone coming in, hints as to how, to navigate, research in these waters. They've known these what happens in these areas, and their input regarding the coasts and reefs around islands, it honestly just reveals that, the instances that modern coral science may just be overlooking on a whole. So that's my take on that, just because I've learned so much from, fishermen that I've encountered, and also that's because I want to. So yeah, but I feel like on the other end of that, modern coral science and traditional coral science, like there's still a knowledge gap that we need to explore within the Virgin Islands. And I don't know if it's the same for anyone on Guam or in Hawaii, where the gap usually starts on land, and our activities, all our actions have the potential to impact our near coastal oceans and reefs. And I've been exposed to comments like, we don't need reefs, or we don't need mangroves. And usually that's coming from people who aren't involved and who don't traverse these areas frequently to see the differences, but they just hear it from somebody, or just choose to take that opinion from wherever they get it, and they put it on and they press upon people, and other things like fish are plentiful, y'all don't know what y'all talking about. Like, we always catch fish. It's like, but that is on another, that's on the other spectrum. That's just how, people who are coming to do, parachute science can regard these things, where they say, well, they're plentiful fish, so we can just come to science here and just never mind about what other people say, So just these comments just tend to highlight the, consumer-based level of thinking sometimes, and it happens here a lot.
No, one thing that really stood out to me was like perception of what science is kind of like dictated by who is saying it sometimes, or like just in the way we perceive it, in the sense that, like, you're completely and totally correct that traditional science is modern science. I could even just think as like an ecologist going into just like a random space that I've never been to, and maybe taking like months or years to find out something so basic that I could just easily find out by asking somebody who's like local to that community, who has done this for years, right? So I think it's super important to recognize, like, especially in like this field and coral reef science, to recognize and respect the knowledge, right, of people who are the traditional owners, and the tradition, like the people who actually live in the communities where we study the coral that we all love, right? But yeah, with that, I'll give it over to Emily for the second question. Thank you for these responses.
Awesome. Yeah, I heard a lot, pretty much everyone talking about how the people in these local communities and these waters are the most knowledgeable and know so much more than people who are just coming in and doing research in these areas in a very short amount of time. But I think in ecology overall, but also in our fields, there's this it very much is a trend where we have parachute science. So I wanted to ask you all, have you witnessed any effects of parachute science on communities living in proximity to these coral reef ecosystems, or have you experienced any of those effects personally?
I can start. I didn't experience it personally, but I experienced knock-on effects of it. So where I did my master's research was at this fish pond on Oahu, which is an amazing place. Yeah, they do a lot of really great work. If you go to UH, or work at HNB, you've probably been there before. But when I was setting up my master's, it was very clear that they had been badly burned, I guess, by mainland and like even UH scientists just coming in and like doing whatever research that they wanted to do, and then the fish pond not really getting anything helpful out of it, you know, after they like put in time and resources to like facilitate their research, because it's not like you need someone to help you. You can't just like go around there by yourself. So they had very clear like expectations and boundaries in terms of how we like established that relationship, and what kind, like being clear that like, I mean, I was going to do it anyway, but making sure that my work was beneficial to them. So I mean, I was stoked to see that. I mean, I'm not stoked that that happened to them, but I'm, you know, they figured out what they wanted and made sure that like they were getting something out of it that was useful to them. But yeah, so experienced the after effects of it.
Yeah, I think also you hear like little instances when you're in the field. Our lab does like various work across the Pacific, and we were on a field expedition, and we were doing our science. We talked with our local partners, and we were doing land visits to individual communities. And there's this one teacher at this school in Micronesia on this one of the outer islands. So it's a really small local community. And she was just wondering what we were doing. And we were like explaining it to her, and we were telling her about the work that we were doing. And she was like, so we're never going to hear about it. And that's like the reality that a lot of these community members feel, is like they've been so exploited that they're like, we're just going to take all the knowledge with us and not even share. And they welcome, like Pacific Islanders, from my experience, like are so welcoming and so giving. And I think sometimes they just get like the short end of the stick, which is really hard. And hearing that sort of disappointment already from her was kind of, it like woke a sense in me and like, oh, this has been the norm for a long time. And I think as we start to shift away from that, but even though we're trying to like do better in these systems, it's still like lasting effects, and we still see that.
Yeah, so I myself have not witnessed the effects of parachute science. My PI is Dr. Steve Palumbi, pretty common name in our field. And I'm very fortunate enough to be a part of a lab that is like, goes out into the Pacific and intentionally is very cautious, or not cautious, but considerate of how to not do parachute science. And although I haven't seen the negative effects of parachute science, I have seen the positive effects of being conscious about it. And so Steve works all over the Pacific, in Palau, Micronesia, American Samoa, etc. And because of his willingness to really want to help and support the community, he built these amazing relationships and bonds with community members, making projects for me that I'm interested in much easier. Like I found that like when I talk to other people at Pickrick or in Micronesia about asking if I'm able to do a project, and then I talk about Steve, they very much appreciate what he's done in the past, making my my research much more easier. And so, although not a negative effect, it really does kind of highlight the positive impacts that can come of being conscious about preventing parachute science, or not trying to do parachute science, I want to say.
Yeah, I myself have not witnessed firsthand parachute science, but I've heard of it a lot. You know, there's areas that can be improved upon, especially in the Virgin Islands, because, you know, as much as there isn't a large marine science community here, you know, more so it's people who move here and they, you know, get jobs and become part of the community, which kind of leads into like representation in marine science. However, but I've gotten questions and comments that are like, so why is it not you out there, doing this, or does the research that translate come back to us? Do we get to know what was going on? It's like mostly yes. The other parts of it I don't really know, but at the same time I can say that I haven't witnessed it. However, I know there are instances where it's going on in the territory. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your insight. I actually, hearing everything that you talked about, I have a follow-up question for you all. What do you think we should be conscious of when entering these local communities to do research, either on your end as a researcher or from other people maybe coming into your own communities?
I think explicit like permission is very valuable in creating a space where you're not forcing that permission, you're making it very like comfortable. It's a collaboration as opposed to I'm just doing work here. And I also think checking your personal biases and your privilege as a researcher, as a visitor in any Indigenous space, it really like puts into perspective like the work that you're doing and the communities that are being involved. I'm really fortunate to work in a lab that is very like hands-on, and we are really proud of the local partnerships that we've made. And those partnerships last like even beyond the scope of an expedition. Like they last when we get back to San Diego, they last on Zoom because it's that accessible right now. And I think those are the ways that you like researchers can invest in these partnerships and foster like stronger relationships.
Yeah, definitely agree with what Ami said. I think, well, first off, like seeing if there's anyone already doing work in the place that you're trying to work in. There's often I know in Hawaii at least there's a lot of local groups doing work already. Like you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like you can have someone else help facilitate connections for you. Another one I would say would be like don't come in like guns hot, like let's do science, this is what I want to do. Like you might need to spend months, maybe a year or more, fostering those relationships. I know this is really hard for a lot of people with like funding timelines, but if you want to do like good, meaningful work, you need to be willing to like put in that time to lay that foundation. And I mean, Ami and I are in the same lab, so I see like our advisor has had relationships with these communities for like decades, and they're like good friends now because there's been so much time invested in like going to that place and working with those communities. And then another thing I would say would be to think of ways that you can give back. So like on a lot of our expeditions, we do community outreach while we're there. We have people from like our local partners come into the field with us, train people in your methods, like show people what you're doing, be open and be clear about what you're doing. Like people are like, especially like Indigenous and local people are very curious and excited to learn things like that. So bring them along and don't see it as like, oh, I'm doing this to like check a box with NSF that says like broader impacts. Like do it to, like enable those people to be able to do that sort of stuff later on.
I would follow that with in apart from just including them, their additional questions, the community's additional questions. Don't be afraid to answer them, or don't be afraid to say I don't know. Because sometimes you go there guns blazing like you know everything, and then there's a level of respect that gets built on that. Coming in all hot and playing like you know everything, and then when you get asked certain questions, you try to give them a sideline answer or maybe play it off. Just don't be afraid to say I don't know, or maybe I need more research to be there. There needs more research in that area. And I think you would be the perfect person to help me, or do you know somebody that would be helping me? So back to fostering those relationships and, just connecting everyone, so it could come to a full circle moment where you have multiple players aiming at this one research interest, which could then foster into different research interests. So we all play in the game of, all right, let's just lift each other up. So that was my input on there.
Yeah, I really appreciate the themes of transparency and uplifting these communities. I very much align with that too. Something about my personal journey is I really wanted to use science as a tool to help preserve local ecosystems and the communities that rely on those ecosystems. And I feel that that's the way that our lab kind of focuses our research. We're asking ourselves, like, how can we use science to benefit these local communities, and then being transparent about it, and working with them, like what Anela said, incorporating them in some of the research. Something simple that we did that was really fun was in Majuro Atoll, we asked for permission to sample from one of the locations. It was really nice. We got to meet with the chief and ask for that permission. And then we taught the chief's grandkids how to put or build simple coral restoration structures, where we simply just zip tied corals down onto like an egg crate and some rebar. And I really liked it because they were like, oh, it's that easy. And I was like, yeah, it's that easy. And that's basically what we're doing here as scientists. And so just being transparent, and like the perspective of using science as a tool to help these communities is really what really helped me engage with them in a lot better way.
Kaiku, you made me think of something else about I like had it and I lost it for a second, but how like fostering these collaborations, if it sounds like it's work, then like that's okay. Like it should be more work for you, but you'll probably get so much more out of it than you initially thought. And then something Shamoy said made me think about like you might even get, or questions might even be raised by, like whoever the community you're working with that you didn't even think of that might turn out to be like an even better research question. And then another thing that Kaiku made me think of was trying to be like really conscious of whatever local like political system is in place. Like some of the places that we visited, I wasn't the one doing like the work on the ground, like fostering these collaborations, but I saw the end product and it took them so long because it's like so intricate, right? Like we were in Fiji and there's like all these, you have to meet with like all these different chiefs. And then the Vanuatu too, also very a lot. It seems complicated to me because like in Hawaii you could just go get a permit and like technically you would have your bases covered, but and I think in Vanuatu too you can just like like I have this thing, I can do it, but that's not like the right way to do it, right? And if someone tells you no, like we don't want that here, like you have to be okay with that. So just trying to be like as respectful as possible, and being okay if someone says they would not like you to do science here.
Yeah, listening is a very important aspect when working with communities. Listening in the sense of listening to concerns, to what the community is saying, and if they're like, we don't want you doing this here, then it's something that we have to respect as scientists, because these people are the stewards of their lands, and it'd be very disrespectful for us to come in and either do science without asking for permission or hearing what they're saying and doing the exact opposite. And so listening, very important.
Absolutely. I think you guys bring up a lot of really good points. And I feel like as ecologists, we're often very focused on our own research and the science and the ecology, and that's it. But it goes much deeper than that, right? Especially as we're working with these natural ecosystems, and it's stewarded by people who live in these areas. And it's so important to interact and involve these local people and foster those relationships, even if it is going to take time, because ultimately that's going to be a lot more valuable down the road, right? And it's really great to hear your perspectives on that. Okay, Daniel.
So with this next question, I guess one thing that we should all be taking away, I guess one thing that has really stood out is that traditional knowledge is not its own thing. It is modern science. And with that, I think the next question is going to be more about sharing a time you incorporated, and I'm switching the question a little bit, but you incorporated the local or native community into your work, and some of y'all have already touched on this, and maybe y'all can elaborate a little bit more. And in addition to that, what impact did it have on your work and those around you?
Yeah, I'll start. So my team works on a project called Super Reefs, and it's a collaboration between local organizations and Ann Cohen, Dr. Ann Cohen at Hui. And part of our process is first meeting with like different community members before even starting the research to see if they're interested in what we're doing, and it opens up the opportunity for us to talk story. And this aspect of talk story is where we can like listen to concerns, we can share project details, and it also gives us the opportunity to hear about some Indigenous knowledge that they might be comfortable sharing with us. And so with our project, we recently worked in the Marshall Islands, like I just said, and we were able to have our pre-research meeting with the community, and we shared our project. They were very interested in it, and they were able to share with us reefs that, one, they either wanted to see protected because they were culturally significant, or two, reefs that they thought fit the project goals a lot. And so part of the project was identifying reefs with increased numbers of thermally tolerant individuals. And after talking with community members, we heard a lot of them be like, oh, you should go over here, or you should go over here. This is where the reefs have traditionally not been bleaching or have been maintaining their health throughout climate change. And so basically through that talk story component and incorporating local communities like right from the start, we were able to save so much time in terms of having to scout, having to figure out what reefs to sample, etc. And it really made the project go a lot more smoother. Based on our input from the community members, we were able to design a project with them in helping them figure out where their thermally tolerant reefs are. And so that's my experience of using Indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge in our research.
So this is actually pretty recent for me, where the company I work for now, we were tasked with hosting a charrette. If you don't know what a charrette is, it's a gigantic workshop where we had to come up with a restoration idea for this area on St. Croix called Great Pond. So it's a 50-hectare pond, which used to house mangroves. It used to be a really good tidal basin. And over the years, throughout climate change from Hurricane Hugo, it started to decline. And majority of our task was to, be able to involve the local community, highlight research that has been done there, and also host events where the local community can share their feedback in addition to the experiences with that area on St. Croix. And there was just a plethora of information that I gathered, and I don't know how I'm holding on to it right now because it's a lot. And it stemmed from, I fished here, what animals used to be in here, how long ago it had been closed, how often it closes throughout the years, how much rock salt it produces, how much fine salt it produces, where the water used to go, and how often it used to be inundated with water. So definitely being able to, include the community, the surrounding community, that too, in what your research is just makes your research a lot easier and gives you a better idea of how to support that community, especially when the restoration is going on, because majority of it is going to be construction restoration, where it's going to be restoring the tidal flushing of that pond. So making them aware that this is what we're going to be doing, and giving them the opportunity to ask questions about it. And these questions might not get answered in the front end, but however, going back to the drawing board and either emailing or seeing them on the street, because our islands are small, so we might be able to see everybody whatsoever. I don't know about Hawaii, that's kind of big. But yeah, so that's an area where I had to use a lot of the community, especially in decision making, so.
I think a lot of the work that I've done has been in partnership with, or like the lab's partnership with the Wait Institute, which is a nonprofit that's based in San Diego. So I've been on quite a few expeditions, helping to like provide science support for their field work, but a lot of what they do is helping governments with marine spatial planning. So we do like the field component of coral and fish surveys, just like all over the country. But I think they do a lot of, or they incorporate like local perspectives at pretty much every step of this process, from like picking the sites in the first place for where to visit, to bringing local scientists out on the ship with us to help us with diving, to narrowing down like the places where they're going to put the protected areas. But I wanted to highlight one time when we dive in 10 meters of water. We just need hard bottom and 10 meters of water and roughly like a 10 by 10 meter site to do our plots. So even though we put a point down at this spot, we'd like use Google Earth, right, to just like eyeball, like that looks pretty good. There's a lot of latitude for us to pick like where exactly we're going to dive when we're actually out on the boat. And I remember this one time in Vanuatu, we're like driving around, we're like, oh, this looks pretty good. And then one of the women who was diving with us, she worked for like Vanuatu fisheries or something. She was like, well, over there is our like herbivore management site. And we're like, obviously let's go dive over there so we can like help support that effort. Like we never would have known that if she hadn't been on the boat with us and told us that. So yeah, we got way more out of that dive than just, oh, let's go to this random spot right over here.
Yeah, also with field work, I've been on expeditions where we've had local divers even lead the charge, and they're really active in spatial planning and choosing the sites and kind of guiding us because it's their waters and they're the most knowledgeable people who are on this expedition. Like they are invaluable. I was on a Blue Prosperity Micronesia cruise along with National Geographic, and it was really clear that we wanted to make the expedition reflect the needs of the community as opposed to like Nat Geo's needs, and they really put them at the forefront. They made the community involved in like all aspects that we can. We did a lot of land visits, a lot of outreach with the communities, and when we had the local divers on, it like gave so much pride to all these different community members because they saw themselves like, they're like, oh, I know Adore, I know Anthony, that's my cousin, like that's crazy that he's on this ship. And I was like, that shouldn't be the case. Like they should see themselves like working in these waters, taking ownership, taking autonomy of it. And I think that's something that like goes beyond the scope of science, but is like how things should be managed, especially in these island communities. And so just like empowering the local people and empowering like these ecosystems in a sense, like those two things are deeply connected. And that just goes to show what you can do through these collaborations and through inclusivity.
Thank you, Ami. I really liked what you said because that's exactly what we want to do as scientists, is help local community members become those leaders of their own natural resources. And so I really liked how Nat Geo was able to focus on community-based needs, but also have the local community members be the leads of those dives. I think that is excellent, and that's exactly how we can uplift these communities for long-term success. Because that way, those divers can now recruit more people, or they can they have the local knowledge, but also they're trained in Western science. And so I think that's a great example.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like that's ultimately like the way to empower people who are, like should be the leads of this sort of work. Again, thank you for all your answers. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Emily for the fourth question. And unless anybody else has anything else to say.
I wanted to add one more thing pertaining to what I shared earlier. Another part of what we had to do, or we engaged the community doing is giving them options. And the biggest option is to do nothing. You know, just giving them that option, giving the local community an option where, if something looks like it needs to be done, but then it's worked so long, it's worked for them for, for the longest while, and or if it didn't work, if it hadn't worked for them for the longest while, they still have the option of saying, oh, we don't want this done, or we should do something about it. However, we can regulate how much we do about it, and then, areas of, I wouldn't say expertise, but advice can come in where, if we do this, this may happen. And if you really want to continue seeing your community either grow or be stable, these are, risks you'll be at risk. These are risks you'll be taking. And, an option to do nothing is also an option. That's what I'm trying to say for any local community.
Absolutely. I'm hearing a lot of really great points about involving local community members, empowering local people, and doing our part in uplifting everyone in these communities, right? And so I wanted to ask you all how important, and Kaiku, you really touched on this in your last point, but how important do you feel it is to involve people from coral reef communities directly as scientists and leaders in our field? And maybe what is the best way do you feel is what do you feel is the best way to empower these people?
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah, the best way I feel to empower these people is by letting them make the decisions that involve their own resources, putting them in these leadership positions. And then also education. Basic education can go a long way. When we were on our trip, we taught some classes at the College of Marshall Islands. And it was a little surprising as to how many students were very interested in wanting to protect coral reefs without knowing the basics of coral ecosystems, etc. And so just basic education went a long way with them. And then also getting them excited, reminding them that they really can become future leaders in marine conservation. For that specific workshop that I just noted, I had a pre-test and a post-test just to evaluate how I did as a lecturer. And in the beginning, it was a little discouraging because one of the questions was, I am a leader in marine conservation. And many of them put a 1, which meant strongly disagree. But by the end of the workshop, after reminding them like, hey, it's not that hard to do this. All you need to do is care about it. And also, if you're interested, there are avenues that you can take as a local person to be able to support conservation. And at the end of the workshop, I had much more people who, instead of strongly disagree, put strongly agree. And so that was a huge success for me personally. But also it really highlighted a simple way that I didn't think was so simple, that you could really help uplift those communities. So yeah, I would say education, putting these community members in leadership positions and making sure that they're the ones making the decisions about their own natural resources. That's how I believe we can uplift local communities.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add on to that, but I think recognizing that like they are the experts in this space, and treating them as such can go a huge way, and just like making sure you're giving that respect to them, and involving them as much as possible at every step that you can, um, will go a huge way. And like our advisor is always talking about like, oh, I would like, his goal is for all of our local collaborators to be able to do all the work themselves, and then when something happens, like we don't need to be there, you know, like they can just go and like do it themselves, and we can help like facilitate that, but yeah, trying to empower these communities to like be able to do the work they want to do for the questions that they're interested in, and then supporting them where you can and where they need that support.
Awesome. I actually wanted to hear more from you all. How did you guys get involved in coral reef research? How did you become interested in this field?
I think my most honest answer is that I wanted to do something to like serve my island, and I think coral reefs were like, this was the pathway to do it. This graduate degree is the pathway, is what I feel is like the best way I can serve my community. And so it wasn't really exposed to me in undergrad. Like everyone wanted to be a medical doctor, everyone wanted to be an engineer, and I didn't really see myself as a coral reef scientist, but I saw people doing coral reef research in Guam and they weren't local. And I was just like in awe, and I couldn't even fathom like how to do that, how to do graduate school, how to do academia. And so I guess this whole process is just me trying to have a seat at the table, trying to like be involved in my community in this capacity. And I guess like as I go back throughout like this graduate program and with my fieldwork, like I'm just reminded of like why I'm doing this. So that's kind of my philosophy on this career pathway.
Should I start with I've always loved the ocean? No, just kidding. Um, no, for me, it was more so from informal education route. I it was more impressed upon me when, you know, just going kayaking through just summer programs when I was more so 11, 12, and, you know, just remembering what it was like. I actually wanted to be a plastic surgeon. So my first year of college was dedicated to pre-med. Look at me today. I thought it would have been a lot of school, but I'm still in school. So the informal education route was my in, and realizing that that is a niche that hasn't really been explored by, you know, local islanders here in the Virgin Islands. But however, it's getting a lot more prominent because there are different summer camps that, you know, appeal to ocean education, land to ocean education, and just more implications where we are surrounded by water, and we should be able to be, you know, we should have the water as part of our daily lives. Yeah. However, when it comes to being a full-on marine scientist, like research is my passion, where I want to know more. I'm always at a quest for knowledge because it fuels me. So that's why I'm into marine science and marine ecology. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Shamoy, for sharing that. My personal journey was about earlier I mentioned how I really wanted to use science as a tool to uplift my community. And the reason for that is because being raised born and raised on Molokai, Hawaii. The island population is very small. It's about 7,000 people. There's one road, one high school, no stoplights. It's a very rural community. And a consequence of that is shipping goods in can make them very expensive. For example, a gallon of milk was $8 10 years ago, which is a lot. And so a lot of the local people, including my own personal family, would rely on the land and sea for many of our resources. I did this at a very special location to my family called Mo'omomi. And here I learned how to like gather limu, gather opihi, spearfish, etc. Basically learned what it meant to be a Hawaiian and gathering food like my ancestors. But also at this location is where I witnessed coral bleaching and the negative effects that it had on how much food we'd be able to catch. And so that really drove me to pursue this career from a very young age. I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist starting in around middle school. And because of that, I was able to really capitalize on it. And, oh, I don't like that word. I was really able to focus on it and pursue that interest. And so now I get to be a scientist that works on both preserving local ecosystems, but also making sure that my family's livelihoods are secured. And it's pretty fun, pretty exciting, and I don't know, I love being a coral biologist.
Yeah, I feel like the way I got here is kind of like a series of happy accidents. It's not something that I necessarily like set out to do, you know, when I was thinking about college, or yeah, I guess when I was thinking about college, really, I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist, but I had a lot of interests like many kids do, like all over the place. But I had started fishing with my dad more and more, and so I actually like consider myself more of a fisheries ecologist. I'm kind of newish to like coral reef fish, and then I have kind of over the course of my PhD gotten more and more into the coral space, as seems to happen in my lab oftentimes. But it was kind of like a sort of thing where I was like, well, shouldn't we have Native Hawaiians managing our fish and our natural resources? It wasn't something that I saw a lot of. So yeah, I just got further and further like down the rabbit hole. And part of it was like, I love to dive, I love to be in the water, and thinking about like, well, how could I do that and like get paid to do it, but not like work in the dive industry and deal with tourists. So it's partly like cultural responsibility, and then partly selfish, where it's like I want to do something that I love to do. Yeah, and I'm very lucky that my like early on being interested in the ocean, and like that was something that my parents always really like encouraged. And I wanted to shout out to my mom who's on the Zoom, which is cute. Hello. Yeah, so kind of just sort of like took opportunities where I saw them, and here I am.
Yeah, it's great to hear all of you talking about, you know, like having a seat at the table and uplifting your community, but also being a part of the science because you enjoy it. And regardless, however you got here, I'm glad you're all coral reef scientists, and I'm glad you can be part of everything that we're talking about today. So, does anyone have anything else to add? If not, we can hand it over to Danielle.
I have something I want to add, just like
Yeah.
a little PSA. I feel like when you are Indigenous, there's this pressure to like be Indigenous all the time and to like be a representative of your community. But if I just want to say, if you're on this Zoom and you are Indigenous, you don't have to do the stuff that we're like, it's okay to just be a scientist or whatever. Like you don't need, not everyone wants to do the same, like, oh, I want to go home and whatever. And it's okay. So don't feel like you're pressured to do that.
No, Anela, seriously, I feel that. in Hawaii, we have a word called kuleana, and it's like your responsibility. And a big part of being Hawaiian is making sure that you do everything you can to support the next generation. And at times it can be a lot of pressure. I felt that a lot actually growing up Indigenous. It's like a huge pressure of just like, what am I going to do to help my people? What am I going to do to help my people? And although I found something that I love, it might not align with anyone else in here. So if you're Indigenous in here and you don't find something that you love, that you can also like directly support your people, I just want to echo Anela in saying that it's okay. It's you existing is just enough. Like, it's very much okay. No pressure, literally.
Awesome. I think y'all really like, like in soccer when like there's a playmaker and they assist you and then you score a goal. I guess like I feel like this is a perfect transition into the last question because I can totally empathize from the point of view that I think as like one of the three like Latinos in my graduate program, just me existing in that space, and especially in a city where it's like 50% Hispanic, is kind of in itself its form of activism and its form of just like saying something against what's the norm there. But in addition to that, like even though it has affected my mental health, in terms of like giving myself or giving a lot of myself to like uplift not just like my community, but just like marginalized people in general who need to be highlighted and whose voices need to be heard. It does get heavy sometimes, but I feel like over this last 8 years of being a biologist and then a marine biologist, like it has been the thing that has put purpose into like just like the questions that I ask as a biologist. But anyways, related to that is like I think the last question, and it's really just about like identity in the space with regard to like being a coral reef scientist. So I just wanted to ask, do you feel represented in the coral reef scientific community?
No. Next question. No. I mean, we're underrepresented, right? So generally, no. I do think sometimes Hawaiians are overrepresented, especially when we're doing like Pacific things. There'll be a lot of Hawaiians on whatever like the panel or something is, and I would love to see more faces from smaller like islands or like SIDS or whatever, like it doesn't all have to be about Hawaii all the time. But yeah, generally I don't feel like Pacific Islanders are represented, even though we have all of the corals, like we should be in the spaces. So not we don't have all the corals, but yeah, I do think sometimes I feel it more than other times. Like, I moved to San Diego. I didn't expect to be surrounded by a bunch of Hawaiians. I do think in my lab, my experience is a little different because I have Ami. So it's, we have shared life experiences. So it feels a little less, I don't know. I guess I feel a little bit less like out of place. Being able to like have her in the lab, and then we have a lot of other like minority women scientists in the lab as well. But somewhere I didn't expect to feel it was when I was at UH actually, and I don't want to like put UH on blast. This was a few years ago, but like I was the only person from Hawaii in my cohort, which was crazy. So I think that was when I really started to feel, or like the most underrepresented I've felt, which is weird because I was like at home. So clearly there's some sort of disconnect there, but yeah, so sometimes, but not always as like bad as I thought maybe I would.
No, Anela, I really feel that because I got into UH Manoa, which is my dream school, Native Hawaiian, working in a Native place, etc. It was amazing. I was in the orientation meeting, and it was really weird how I was the only Native Hawaiian. I thought that was very interesting and ironic because I know so many Native Hawaiians who are interested in marine science. It's a part of us, I guess. And so many natives who are like very interested in this work. And so I guess doing my undergrad in California and coming back for grad school at Manoa, I expected a little bit more native representation. I felt that if there was one place that would have the most of my people, it would be that school. But seeing that was a real shock to me. And I just wanted to like highlight that issue that Anela brought up. And I also agree that Native Hawaiians dominate the not Polynesian, but the Pacific space a lot. I think it's weird because Native Hawaiians are also, they're overrepresented in the sense of the Pacific, but underrepresented in the sense of science generally. But one thing that I do as a scientist is I like to uplift others' communities. And so in Palau, I like the note in Palau in the chat. I thought that was really cool. But in Palau, I had the honor of going on to the radio show and giving like a little spiel about my research to disseminate that to the public. But what I really liked to hammer in on was the fact that we needed more Palauans in STEM, and that if they were interested, they could come down to the Palau Aquarium, and there are a lot of Palauans who currently work at the aquarium that can serve as those role models, and like help them figure out what a career in marine science is like. And I thought that was a very simple and easy way to really broadcast the idea that marine science is a very valid career that you can do in your life. I don't know if this aligned with anyone else, but growing up, like I said, I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist from a younger age. My parents did not support it. They did not feel that it was a career that I'd be able to make a living off of. And so explaining to the general public in both Hawaii, Palau, Micronesia, or Palau, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, etc., is a very easy step that I feel that I can do as an Indigenous scientist to support others who are like considering something about the field. But to go back to the original question, I do feel this weird complex of being overrepresented in a Pacific context and underrepresented in a general yeah.
Yeah, that's facts right there. Overrepresented in that context, and also being underrepresented in the entirety of marine science. So, like you and Noah, I was the only Caribbean native in my grad school program, and out of 17 people, that was crazy to me. However, I mean, that was something that was dealt with. The directional strides that as a Black Caribbean native with dreadlocks has like however, I can speak for myself because strides have been taken where I want to see the new generation of marine scientists from the islands, whether they go to school wherever, but at least they know that they're from the Virgin Islands. They have that kind of representation in the capacity where in decision making, in understanding what marine science is all about, the different sectors of marine science you could go into, having someone in that capacity. I mean, I can't play all those roles. However, it's important to see someone in that role as opposed to seeing someone else that's not from here and giving you directions like you're less than, or I'm smarter than you, that's why you have to listen to me. Just stuff I've experienced thus far. But I just want to, sometimes I definitely don't feel represented, and it's made notice, so I don't hold back my mouth. And just making it so that everyone from the islands, that we're not everywhere, but we're everywhere. And we're in capacities that can contribute to our newer generation of either scientists, doctors, whoever that needs, that we don't feel, wherever we don't feel represented, we then acquire representation and we get the knowledge from people who are sitting in those seats, and just for the leg up or just for the help, because everyone else is doing it around us, so we got to do it too.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. Echoing that I don't really feel represented in this community. I think we're making really good strides, like as we start to be more inclusive and make science and academia more equitable. We're in this transition period of I'm watching like my peers who I went to college with get their graduate degrees, being their PhDs, and I'm like seeing this transition, but it still is a transition period, and it's not quite where I would feel comfortable to be like, oh, this is the norm. It's definitely not the norm yet. I connect with like a lot of Pacific Islander women like Anela, or Dr. Nicole Yamase, and those are like privileges to work so closely with them, but that's definitely not the norm. And there's a question in the chat that says, what does reconnection look like for communities that may have had to leave their coastlines? Like that is something that is one of like that's one of the hardest things I struggle with in grad school, is being away from my community and like trying to feel like I have a sense of belonging in this space. It's just like a constant battle, I guess, like an internal struggle of like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? I don't see myself in this. But I think that goal of like, oh, I want to be one of the people who are in this, who are like setting the scene, uplifting their communities, seeing their peers like take charge of our island and our island's resources. That's really empowering, and that's a really good reminder. And I think just opening that space and like building these connections, just existing as an Indigenous person is like the thing to do. And I think like what Anela said, like you don't have to always do the hard pressing work, like just existing is enough. And then sometimes even like doing the hard pressing work, like that takes the extra mile, and that's just like small reminders. And for any other Indigenous people in this audience who have activities similar to this, like please share them, please make this known, please spread these out, advertise this out to all of us, because it's definitely not a shortage of talent or curiosity in these like Indigenous scholars. It's a systemic problem. And I think at the personal level, all the things that we do to work on this just tries to fill that gap, I guess. Yeah.
Ami made me think of one thing, and then I had another thought. But what you were saying, and I guess related to the question in the chat about reconnecting, like I don't know if the other panelists struggle with this, but I struggle with not feeling like I belong here in the space that, I am in graduate school, but then also when I go home, struggling with belonging there as well, like by living away for other people who live in diaspora, like when you do go back to your land feeling like you're not native enough anymore, like, you're like like, oh, you're too holly now, whatever. And maybe not everyone sees you that way, but I struggle with that sometimes. So yeah, like reconnecting is, I think it's hard, but like it's hard both ways. Like you're changed by where you are, and it can be hard to like feel like you are this, like you're not the same as you were when you left, and that can be challenging, especially like so much of my identity is tied to being Hawaiian. Feeling less Hawaiian is a struggle when I go home sometimes. And then another thing I just thought of and wanted to make sure to mention was, I know like I talked a bit about like feeling, and Kaiku too talked a bit about feeling, like we're the only local people or like Native Hawaiian people in our cohorts at UH. I did want to mention that the graduate students I went to UH with in the marine biograduate program were some of the most like culturally sensitive and conscious people I have ever met. And I don't know what is happening in that program where if like people are recruited who just have the inclination, but I like something is definitely happening over the course of their PhD where they turn into these just like they're just like so amazing, and someone needs to figure out what UH is doing in that sense. I know they started doing like community work days, or there's this like I think it might be part of orientation or something where you go and you like do work in the Ahupua'a, so like from the mountains to the sea, and all these different, or like with all these different community groups, so you really like are part of the community, part of the land. But yeah, I wanted to make sure to highlight that positive of UH's grad program.
Thank you all for your insights, and I think I think again, I empathize with a lot of how you feel, and I think like the most important thing I'm taking away from this is that there we are, or you're in this transition phase, but I definitely see y'all as like the future, or like the future for your communities. And not to put a bunch of weight on y'all, but like it is your your presence and just you existing is like so important. And I wanted to make sure y'all knew that. We're kind of running out of time, but I have to do one last question from the audience, but it will go with like what we're talking about now, and maybe like quickly, like in 5 minutes, but do any of y'all have plans to like take like your graduate degrees and what you have been learning back to your communities in some capacity, like as a professor, scientist, etc.?
Yeah, I'll start. I am definitely like 100% committed to my community in the sense that I really want to go back home and teach as a professor. I don't really care where, but hopefully to uplift other Native Hawaiians who are interested in STEM field careers. Like I said, growing up, for me, my parents didn't think marine science was a career that I should pursue, and they pushed me away from it. But I want to somewhat help inspire other Native Hawaiians and mentor a lab to help them like understand that it is a science, it is a career worthy of pursuing, and it can fulfill a lot of things, whether it's like your kuleana that you feel that you might have, or your interest in becoming a scientist, etc. And so that's what I hope to do in my professional career. I did want to bring up something that I forgot to bring up earlier. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just going to slide it in here right now. When you are working with local communities, for everyone in the audience, I would strongly suggest understanding the historical context of those areas while doing it. It can help you a lot. In the sense of Native Hawaiians, there was a lot of historical trauma with, I would say, like the overthrow of our queen by pineapple farmers. What else? The banishment of our cultural traditions and our language by the missionaries. And then the release of biocontrol hazards that just went out of control, like mongoose to control snake populations, but instead they killed our native birds. The introduction of coqui frogs to reduce mosquito populations, but the mosquitoes are now here, and at night it's extremely loud. And so this understanding that context can help you understand how to work with the community more, because what that tells me is that this community has experienced lots of I don't know how to say, mishaps when working with foreigners. And so it might want you to be a little bit more sensitive in how you might work with those communities, just keeping that consideration. And this worked for me in Palau because for those of you who don't know, Palau was colonized by Germany and Japan, like back after back, and now they're facing issues with China fishing in their marine protected areas. And so that navigating that whole thing was a little bit complicated, but understanding that context really helped me work with the community a little bit more. And I'm sorry to awkwardly slide that in there, but I just wanted to make sure that I said that in the podcast. And then reminding everyone of the current question that we are on, like, do we plan the panelists, do we plan on returning back to our local communities and uplifting those communities?
Kaiku, I really like that, and that made me think of something else that is also off topic a little bit, but if you do that background work, I think that also can go a long way in like showing your commitment to that community. I can't tell you how nice it is to not have to educate every single person I meet about like the education or the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom and like all of that stuff, and like having to be a Hawaiian history expert is kind of, it's like a burden on me, right? It's like, oh, in addition to all this other stuff I'm trying to learn, I also have to know all these other things because everyone I meet expects me to be an expert on this because I'm the only Hawaiian that they know. So if you can come into that space having done your own research on that history and not expecting the local community to educate you, like, then I think that that's a really like big plus in your favor. To go back to the actual question, I do plan to go back to Hawaii. That was always my goal in like moving to San Diego. I was already at UH and I felt like I worked so hard to get there, and I was only gonna leave if it was like an amazing opportunity because I wanted to be home so bad. And it was the right decision, but I still plan to go back. But I've like tried to make sure that I am still making connections at home and networking and like trying to position myself well and like leverage I guess my position in graduate school to be able to get back home. I don't want to stay in academia. I want to do like management research. Yeah, that's my plan.
Yeah, I'm at home and I'm doing what I can with the summer camp I run, which I feel like is a good foot in the door. I don't know if I'll go into academia. Don't quote me on that. However, I do I do want to get my PhD, but I want my research to be done at home. Hopefully that can be accommodated. I might just have to do, a year abroad at the home institution, but majority of it is I think I will stay closer to informal education, where the impact, I wouldn't say the impact isn't as great, but then the experiences that do come along for the students I deal with on a yearly basis, and even throughout the year. Like, for example, one of my students are actually in here. What's up, Israel? And he's also one of my mentees. And like when I go diving, he goes with me. A lot of questions he asks, he comes to me, and also he has other science teachers and which he's introduced all of us. And the fact that his community of mentors are growing, and I would like that for every student I encounter. Like their mentorship circle continues to grow as a Virgin Islander and as someone who is interested in marine science. So yeah.
And lastly, I too would also like to go back. I want to be a professor at the University of Guam or work at an NGO, definitely still do marine research, and with a focus on like getting more of the local youth involved and showcasing how this field is like opportunistic and there are like places for them, for tomorrow scientists to do research in Guam. All of this training and all of the things that I think we're all doing in grad school like is preparing for us and giving us the tools to like serve our home. And I think learning how to navigate like Western science and being Indigenous, like those are tools and practices that we're going to use as we like move forward in this career. And I think we're all doing it. And so, yeah, I think that's the overall goal. And I'm really happy with like this panel and hearing everyone's perspectives. And if anyone from has any Guam connections and wants to reach out, please email me. Just throwing that out there. But yeah, I would love to go home, and I'll take any opportunity I can to go home.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again so much for your responses and your insight and everything. Like I said, like this has been like a long time coming, and I've enjoyed hearing all of your stories, and I look forward to seeing where all of y'all end up. But with that, I'll give it back to Emily so we can wrap up this panel.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your fantastic insight and for being vulnerable and sharing your experiences with us. And absolutely, I think it's very important within these conversations to understand that with everything we talked about, the burden of education is not necessarily on local and Indigenous people, but for us as a wider community and as scientists to actively educate ourselves if we are not part of these communities. And I think that's just very important to know. And so thank you all for talking to us about that. But unfortunately, we are right at the end of this workshop. We do want to try to end relatively on time. I think this conversation could and probably should go on for hours and hours, but hopefully with everything that we've just discussed today, it will spark more of a conversation about how we move forward as a scientific community, not only to incorporate this traditional knowledge into our research, but also uplifting and supporting the people most closely tied to these ecosystems and hopefully improving the education and the representation overall within this field. So before we end today, I want to sincerely thank the panelists for being willing to take the time to speak with all of us, because this workshop truly would not be possible without you. We also wanted to thank you as an audience for engaging in such an important topic and being a part of this conversation, and for everyone who's been providing such great insight in the chat as well. It seems like we have some really good conversation going on there, and maybe that will continue after this workshop as well. As a final wrap up, I'd like to bring it back to the panelists and ask just one last question. In one quick sentence, so just one sentence, what is the main point that you would like our audience to take away from what you discussed today, if they were to take nothing else away from what we talked about?
As coral reef researchers, view local partners as partners and not underdogs. Simply as that.
I think mine would be that traditional science is modern science, so view them on an even playing field.
I think I just wanted to say that even though Pacific Island communities are disproportionately negatively affected by global climate change, I feel very supported by all of you being here and having a very open mind in terms of including Indigenous communities and this traditional knowledge into your research. And so I just wanted to say thank you. I'm very honored to be able to speak with all of you today. And thank you to our panelists, Shamoy, Anela, and me too.
I honestly would like to say just thank you for all listening, and just remembering that when we all think of science, it shouldn't always just be to find an answer. It's also to engage with everyone around you and to make sure that answer that you're getting gives a holistic you get a holistic answer, and you get to give back to wherever you're doing your research, especially if it's somewhere that you're not from. And just from the help you get to the results you get from it, it makes the world for these people who definitely helped you along the way.
Amazing. Those are some great parting words for us to end on. I think that's perfect. So I think that is all we have time for right now. Danielle, do you have any final thoughts?
No, it's wonderful to like actually have this happen and to really highlight everyone like Ahmyia, Kaiku, Shamoy, and Anela. Like your stories are very impactful, and I hope to, like I said, like I'm just looking forward to see where all y'all end up. So yeah, just happy.
Amazing. So as a reminder, the recording for this workshop will be available soon on the ICRS SECC website. So keep an eye out for that. Tell everyone who wasn't able to make it today and is interested in this. And hopefully there's a record of everything we talked about, and this conversation will continue for a long time to come. So again, thank you to all the panelists And thank you all for coming. And I think that's it for now. And hopefully we'll see you again soon at a future workshop. So keep an eye out for that.
Aloha.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.